just want to jump in here and talk about the baby's birth. He is taking a little nap, so I thought this would be a good time. I'm gonna try to get everything in order. I had it planned to do it when he was asleep, but he is fussy. It's been a little rough, and anyway, we'll figure it out. So I wanted to start by, his due date was September 23rd, my 11-year-old's birthday. And my 11-year-old went back and forth with like being excited that he was gonna share a birthday and not being excited. At the end, he wanted it, but that day came and went. And so, gosh, I'm trying to think. I feel so scatterbrained, so please forgive me. It's just, there were some details that I felt were important and I didn't include them because the birth was really just a vlog, like kind of as it was happening, I was talking about it. And so I wanted to go back and talk about these details because I thought they were important and just nice to remember. And it's been, he's 8 weeks already, so I feel like those details kind of get forgotten. And as much as I wrote things down, I feel like I'm probably skipping a few things. So going back to the week of when the due date came and went, I had a friend who had her baby on the 23rd, and I was so bummed. I remember feeling like upset because I didn't have my little bundle of joy to hold on to. And at that point, you know, the last month of pregnancy is the slowest. And so, you know, I was like eager to meet the baby because I was getting more excited to, like I would tell my husband every so often, oh my God, I'm so excited. I can't wait for him to be here. So we, you know, that week I met with the doctor that day, the due date, and they said, well, we'll let you go to 42 weeks. Actually, the week before that, they said, we'll let you go to 42 weeks, which would be October 7th. But when I met with a different doctor, because I met with different ones each time, she said, well, you know, I'd like to induce you next week, which would be September 30th, which is like Monday. And so I was like, well, I'd rather wait. And she's like, well, babies are usually fully cooked. And of course that's if you know for sure that they're fully cooked, but a due date is a guesstimate, so we don't know. And I said at that point, well, if I'm gonna get to decide, I'd rather, this might be silly, but I already have a child in September. I'd rather have another child in October. I mean, we're so close. Why would I pick the last day of September? So I said, well, in that case, we'll do October 1st, which was Tuesday. And so, she said, that's fine. I scheduled you for Monday. You can call them on Monday and tell them that you want to move it. And so at that point, the closer I got to that day, I was like, why would I do October 1st? I really don't want to be induced. I'd rather just wait. So we'll do Friday. I didn't want to do Monday the 7th because you're also kind of fearful at that point. Like, is the baby going to be really big? Although they never told me, they were never mentioning anything about the size of the baby. So I was like, let's just do Friday, play it safe. We'll have the weekend to kind of have the baby come. So I did that. And that week I went to get a stress test, a non-stress test. On the last one, they sent me to the hospital and said I'd rather make sure because there were some irregularities. And I was kind of like, I don't think so. I think everything's fine, but better safe than sorry. So I went to the hospital, took all my stuff, and ended up being fine. They sent me home, and I think that might have been the 2nd or the 3rd of October. So I called Friday, October 4th, and I was like, hey, you know, I was scheduled to be induced. They said, we're full basically, so call back at 3. So I think that day we went to go have lunch. We walked around the beach. I'm pretty sure that was the day. And I said, well, I'll call them, you know, 3-ish. We still had to get a sitter for the other 2 kids. So, you know, anyway, I called in at 3 and they said, call us, you can actually come in around 5, I think they said. And I was like, okay. So 5 came and went. The babysitter didn't get there till didn't get home till about 7. So, you know, we didn't end up going to the hospital till 8 p.m. And I remember the security guard was like, this late, like he gave me an attitude, which I was upset about, but you know, at that point I was like, whatever, if they send us home, they send us home. I was fine with it because I didn't want to be induced, like I said. So, and that's where you see, if you go look at the birth vlog, you'll see us kind of walk up to the hospital and, you know, just the process of getting checked in. And then once we were comfy, as comfy can be, because all night they had to monitor me. So they started with, I met the doctor that was on shift, which he would have left at 2 a.m. and he was so kind. I really liked his visit, his, just bedside manner. When he checked me, because at the end it can be painful when they're checking you for dilation, he was very gentle. And it can be tough because the week before with a female doctor, it just felt rougher and she couldn't even feel how far I was dilated. She couldn't get up there far enough. So he was like, well, you're about a 1.5, I think he said, it wasn't too much. So they started me on Cytotec, which was an oral pill. And I was excited about because with Landon, they gave me Cervidil, which was internally, like in the cervix. They would have to put it in every few hours. So this one, I was excited about because then I just had to take it every couple hours, So we did that. He actually felt my stomach and he was like, oh, this baby's gonna be 8 pounds. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. Landon was 8'5", but I was like, no big deal, sure. So all night we did that. And then the morning, the doctor that came in was like, well, we're going to give you Pitocin. So she said that about, I don't know, maybe 7. She said, we're gonna give you 45 minutes to walk and then we'll come back and we'll do it. So I was so exhausted. I wasn't resting very well at that point. And so I split that time and I took maybe 20 minutes to walk and I was feeling uncomfortable. I mean, I was progressing on my own. I was having like minor cramps. And as I walked the halls, I could hear other moms like with the doors open, just going through it, sounded painful. And so we did that for 20 minutes and I took the rest of the time to rest. And I think it was another 20 minutes that I was just like, I'm gonna sleep. And I think I did. And then around 8:22, my water broke. I was just laying there and I felt like a bulge in the vaginal area, in the cervix, I guess, or vaginal area. And then all of a sudden it just popped and it was like a gush of water. And so they had me get up, they changed the bed sheets, and that kind of on and off kept happening. But I was so excited because I should have known better. If you look at the video, I'm like, my water just broke. This is about to happen, because you think that the water breaks and then that's it. I was so fresh-eyed. I should have known better, but I was hopeful. So that happened, and the nurse got busy. So they had given me a nurse who had been there from like 1983 or 84. And, I think she was nice, but nice doesn't cut it sometimes. We have to follow protocol and be hygienic, or, I'll tell you in a little bit about that. So, she came over and I guess she got busy because she was there when the doctor said, we're going to give you Pitocin. And she got busy. And so she didn't come till like 12. And we were okay with that because I did not want Pitocin. I know that just cranks it up for you. And so I was progressing. I mean, there was a point where I was in the restroom just swaying, when you're just against the wall and it's just getting harder. And I remember just crying, and my husband was so supportive. He's always been supportive, with the births. And, but he even cried, I think. And he said it now, like there was just so much defeat already because it was I would say it was a troubled year. The pregnancy was great, but it was everything surrounding it, just the situation. A lot of depression, you could say, throughout the year. So I was checked out. I wasn't really present with the pregnancy because there was just so much going on. My plate was overly full, and just not a great environment in certain situations. And so it was just really difficult for me. So I think that was a culmination of like the physical pain, sort of just kind of ending that whole run of emotional and mental pain for this year. So I cried, just trying to surrender, but just feeling like it's overwhelming because you know what you're gonna go through. And at that point it wasn't that bad, but I knew what was coming. So that happened. Finally, at about 12 something, the nurse comes in and puts the Pitocin in. I mean, if you see me in the video, I look like I'm already dying at that point. So I feel like if I could do it different, I would have spoken up and said, can we talk to the doctor? What are my options? I feel like I'm progressing. I don't need Pitocin at this point. Can we wait? And I feel like she might have, I mean, but we don't know. Because hospitals, I feel like usually they just want you in and out. They just want you to, you know, progress and get your baby and move on. But I don't think for me, Pitocin was necessary at that point because it was just, my body was already progressing. They checked me a couple times, but it seemed like they didn't know how far like dilated I was, which was really odd. And so we didn't know at that point, but she put it in. And you could just, I feel like shortly after, I mean, I had the baby at 225, so they put the Pitocin in at 12. Shortly after, I mean, I felt like if I thought I was dying at 12 before the Pitocin, I was like on death's door. That's how I felt. It was just getting difficult. I always say that it's contractions on crack because it's just overwhelming, super painful. And so it just almost like it's just hard to rest. And I was frustrated. I remember feeling frustrated, like, come on, God, like, come on, body, you know, open up, like dilate, do what you have to do. If I would have been recorded the whole time, I think you would have just seen the frustration in my face, like, come on, you know, you're at the end and you think you're at the end and it's not happening. And every time the contraction came, it was like pushing kind of, I'm not a screamer usually, but if you notice, there's a small piece I included where it's just me, you know, like trying to breathe through it. And so it was hard. So at that point, you know, with all my kids, I don't get epidurals. And I do see, like, I just feel like the face of joy when moms do get epidurals. And I'm like, man, that must be nice. You get to rest, you know, but I usually don't. It could be 50-50. People say that the epidural is wonderful. People say, well, I've had back problems ever since, or I got it, but it didn't work, or it worked on half of my body. So it's a hit or miss. And I thought, I don't want to risk, I already have back issues. I don't want to risk that if it's not a guarantee that it'll work. But let me tell you, with this Pitocin, props out there to those who have Pitocin and they still do it without an epidural because it's so hard. And so they said, look, they checked me and they said, you're at a 5. If you're going to get an epidural, this would be the time to do it. So I said, you know, I had already told my husband, we had already prepped. I mean, he knows each time we go in, I'm like, I'm not going to get it. I don't want to, for me, there's nothing wrong with getting an epidural for you if that's what you like and you enjoy it and it works for you. I'm just speaking about for me, I didn't want it. And so every time I'm very clear with, I'm not rigid with my birth plan because anything can happen. And if it does end up in a C-section, you're going to have to get it. But I know what I want. And so if at all possible, I'd like to be guided towards that direction as opposed to just like give up in my case and just take it. So my husband came over and he had seen me. I feel like this time was harder for him to see me too, just because of the year again that I had, and he saw me through that. And so he came over and he was like, you know, there's no shame in getting it. You know that you're capable of doing it without, but this was just like a whole nother level. And so I remember thinking to myself, because I had such a hard time with Landon being induced and so freaked out about possibly getting the epidural and then a C-section if it had to be that way, that I said, I'm not going to do that this time. I'm not going to take away from my experience worried about something that if you have to get it, you have to get it. So he said that and I thought, you know what? Like I literally was like, okay, all right, it's going to be a new experience. It's going to be just an adventure. Like, this is what I said to myself. It'll be good, you know, just praying that it works if that's the case. So I was like, okay, all right, you know, like hesitant, but like, if I'm gonna commit to this, I'm gonna just say yes. And that's it. And excuse me, even though I put the pressure on myself, knowing that everybody knows I don't get epidurals, and kind of like that thought came in. I don't know if anybody else is like this. That thought came in of like, the first thing people are going to ask me is, did you get an epidural? And, you know, because I feel like even though it's the pressure I put on myself, people are like, whoa, you don't do epidural. And then when you do it, I feel like there's this whole thing of like, oh, you got the epidural, you know? I don't know, maybe my brain's weird, but that's what I was thinking. And I was like, forget it. This is an opportunity to do something different, to experience something different. And so I feel like in a case like that, you have to just, if you're gonna do something, surrender to it and let go of everything. And honestly, even with a birth plan, it's best to not be rigid, because you're gonna end up having a harder time if you're rigid with your rules, because things can happen, you don't know what's going on. So it's best to just be flexible, which is really hard for me. I have to work on that in all senses. But so I say, okay, give me the epidural. And I'm thinking, sure, they're gonna send him in, and in the next 2 minutes, because I'm already dying here, I'm gonna get this epidural. And the doctor says, okay, he'll be here in about 30 to 45 minutes. Mind you, inside, there's like no escape. And I'm like, excuse me? Like inside, I was like, I'm not gonna make it. I don't feel like I'm gonna make it at this point. You're gonna make me wait 30 to 45 minutes. If you've had an epidural, I guess you know what this is like. And I've seen it in movies where they're like, oh, there's a line of people and there's only like one anesthesiologist for the whole floor. And I remember thinking to myself at that moment, like, how the heck do you only have one for, I don't know, say 15 rooms? You need to have 2 or 3, like on backup. But so I'm thinking I'm not gonna make it. Time flies because, or it doesn't fly for me, but time passes anyway. And I don't know at what point, but the anesthesiologist walks in, I'm assuming like in 30 to 45 minutes. And so the nurse is like, let me check you though, before he, and I'm like, oh, good. You know, as I saw him, she checks me and she's like, you're at an 8, right? It used to be you couldn't get an epidural, you know, after, I think like a 5 or a 6. I've had a friend who had an epidural at a 9, which I was like, what? You're already there. So I guess now they are allowing you to do it late in the game. I don't know how you can sit still for that, but anyway. So, so she checks me, she's like, you're at an 8. And I was like, oh no. And I'm looking at the anesthesiologist like, this is my chance, right? But then I'm like, do you think it's gonna take long? And the nurse is like, no, this is your 3rd baby. You're gonna go fast. So I make the quick decision to be like, okay, I won't get the epidural. And as the anesthesiologist is like, okay. And he just, you know, turns and walks, and literally I'm on the bed like this and he's walking and I'm just like following him with my eyes, like with this despair of like, wait, but I'm at an 8. I mean, you know, I'm so close. So he turns around and he leaves. And I just remember thinking, oh no, my ship has sailed. This is not happening. And now I didn't think I could make it. And now what if this thing takes forever? Because you just don't know how your body's gonna work. I just remember thinking, oh God, this is bad. And at some point earlier, they had put in, they did this with Landon too, to monitor the baby's heart rate. They stick something inside of you and they kind of clip it to the top half of their head. It's like a heart monitor, but that way you can be mobile. And I remember at this point, I remember thinking like, I feel like it's coming out, like the string is coming out because they had taped it to my leg. And I remember telling my husband, like, can you check? I feel like the baby's coming out. And he's like, no, this is how fast it went. I feel the string coming out. I feel the string coming out, but I don't see anything. And I was like, okay. All of a sudden I'm like, I need you to look because I think he's coming. The nurse is like, don't push. The doctor comes in and I had a birth bar, you know, and so I'm pushing and I didn't have time to prep for anything. And all right. So they didn't have time to prep for anything. So the doctor that's what I thought. I thought she would, but she's like crying. She's like, I don't want to go take a nap. I was like, you don't have to. Pick one toy, but you have to stay quiet. And then she's, poor thing, I feel like she's tired because of last night. Anyway. And so the doctor comes over, and so I'm holding onto the birth bar and pushing into it and feeling like I need this kid to come out because I was just exhausted. I knew I was exhausted. And so I guess they just rushed over because next thing you know, he was out. And he didn't even have a cone head, which typically, or at least my kids have had cone heads because they're kind of sitting in the birth canal. And so he didn't, and that's why I had a 2nd-degree tear. Later when I looked at the report, it said 3rd degree, so I don't know, it felt like probably 3rd or 4th degree, but it was 2nd degree according to the doctor. And so what was weird was it happened so fast that my pit line in my hand came off. And so when they were giving me the Pitocin to like contract your uterus at that point, it was going everywhere. I had blood on my hand. Everything happened so fast that the nurse like injected my leg with, I guess, Pitocin or something to also help me stop or start contracting the uterus. And then they were like sewing me up. I was so exhausted, but then they handed me the baby, and I guess something was going on with the heart rate or the oxygen, because they handed me an oxygen mask in the quick moment that I was like, he's, you know, baby's coming. And so I had that on my face. And then as soon as I guess I felt that relief, that sense of relief when the baby comes out, I remember yelling at the nurse and the doctor, don't say it, you know, don't say it. Because I had not discussed with them my birth plan, and I had said in the birth plan, I don't want anybody to yell it out. I want to just find out myself. So the doctor was like, we're not. And she flipped over the baby, and there he was. So it was shocking, as I always said, it would be shocking either way, with boy or girl. So then she handed him to me, and I guess at that point everybody was like, oh no, her pit line came out. And that's when the nurse gave me the shot on my leg. It was just so fast. And then like the nurse even like hit her head on a light, because I guess she was walking around kind of crazy. And that's when the doctor was like sewing me up, and that one was more painful. I've torn with the other two. Also, again, no epidural, but it was just not that bad. It was probably maybe 1 or 2 stitches. I don't know. This time it was a lot, and I guess second degree is when you tear like from front to back or something. And so she had to kind of go in there. She even put a cream or an ointment in the rectum. And later I asked her, and she said it was also to help you contract. I don't know. I mean, it was weird. And so I was very sore. So I think that's why this recovery has been harder. And so that happened. And mind you, while I'm in labor, this nurse, the older one, she was like humming while I was in labor. And if you've ever been in labor, you know, sometimes you're just not going to want to smell food around you, or you don't want to hear people talking, or, you know, you just don't know what you're going to react like. And I had music on and off and like meditation, like to help me. But she would come in and like while she's, I don't know, changing the heart rate monitor, she's like humming to her own tune. So annoyed. But I should have just said something, because you don't want to be passive aggressive, and you should speak up. It's your labor. So if this is happening to you, you need to speak up and say, Nurse so-and-so, can you please not? Because she was clueless and she didn't know. And so so that happened. So anyway, fast forward, I have the baby, and that was kind of a blur and crazy. But then as the day started progressing, this is my experience sort of at this hospital, which I've had to sort of mourn the experience, because we can see it from our house. It's it looks physically like beautiful from the outside. It's fairly new. And I had an idea for what I thought it was. I had a great experience at my daughter's hospital, at my son's. I had him in Texas, had her in another city here in California. And so I just thought it was gonna be the greatest thing, because I like staying at the hospital. And just starting from that nurse, she progressively, like throughout the day, she was like sniffling. And again, this was a blur and a fog. And so there was a point, I think, where my husband had to step out of the room. And so she blew her nose. And then she had to later come and give me, or like she had to then give me like a pill. And so she was gonna rip it open, and I was like, it's okay, I can open it. And she's like, oh, I'm just gonna pop it into your hand. And I was like, I literally, for like 2 seconds, was like, oh, okay. So she starts like popping it open. And then she eventually, because it couldn't just pop open, she like had to help it. Again, it was such a fog that, God, I wish I would have just been like, no, you need to get another one. And of course, when you look back, you're like, yeah, I would have done so many other things, but I think I was just like in shock. Because she didn't have gloves, she didn't wash her hands after she blew her nose. Like, those are just weird things. And I feel like not every older nurse, but sometimes people who've been working in an industry for so long just get so used to doing things a certain way, or maybe she just, I don't know, she doesn't follow protocol, and I don't know how she hasn't been caught or told anything. So that one, so that happened. And then so she kept saying like, oh, do you want me to fill your water bottle? And I was like, no, thank you. You know, cause she was taking my water bottle. I was like, no, that's all right. And then when I would ask like, oh, you know, to my husband, like, can you take the baby? She's like, oh, you want me to take him? And I was like, no, thank you. Just at that point, I was just annoyed. So then I think things progressed along. They moved us to the other side of the hospital for recovery. And she goes and gives me, I think, a cup of their cups of water. And typically when you are serving people, I've never been a waitress, but I think it's common knowledge, you grab it from here. Like if it doesn't have a handle, you just grab it from here. She grabbed the cup from here. Yeah, So then I think I used my water bottle. Things like that, those are small details that people I don't think pay attention to until you're seeing things that are not hygienic. And she kept like sniffling and kept sniffling, and it was just odd. And then when I first checked in, they said, oh, we're gonna send you for an x-ray after you give birth. And I was like, for what, you know? And they said, well, you were positive for TB or something. And I was like, nobody told me that I was tested for this, and nobody said that I was positive. So of course I'm questioning if this is really my record, because I don't know if I mentioned earlier, I tested positive for strep B, or sometimes they test you, sometimes you have it, sometimes you don't. So then they have to give you antibiotics while you give birth. And the doctor who sent the lab said, we're gonna test you. If you are positive, we'll call you. And nobody called me. I saw that same doctor the next visit, didn't mention anything. I saw another doctor the next visit, and she's like, oh yeah, you're positive. So haven't had good experience with this sort of hospital organization in particular, because I just don't trust that. And to spring it on someone is just crazy to me. So fast forward, when I went to recovery, the nurse came in, the different nurse, and said, we're gonna take you to x-rays. Which they had originally said, oh, we'll, I don't want you to worry about it, we'll discuss it later. But that just means you're gonna have to do the x-ray. So I did it, and it was negative. I just don't like, it's just shady. Like, if you just be upfront and just talk about these things that should have been discussed way before I went into the hospital. So that happened, and I felt pretty good. People kept telling me I looked pretty good, but I was very sore and uncomfortable. And because I kept pulling on that birthing bar, which was so awesome, I liked the experience, but all my muscles were sore. And so all that day, the plumbing in that hospital, like you can hear anytime anybody flushed, just not like a relaxing, for me. I mean, there's times where it's a pretty relaxing moment at the hospital. Like I said, I had a great time at, my second one at Scripps, and that's in California, and that was a great one. And so was the first time around in Texas. So this was just not great. So the doctor comes in later and she says, well, we'll let you go after 24 hours if you want, or you could stay an extra day. And I was like, no, which all my friends were shocked, because I usually stay an extra day. Whatever you give me, I'll stay. And I didn't think it was worth it. I was like, no, I'll just go home, because you're saying that I can go home after one day. I didn't think it was necessary. But, just based on everything going on, I guess it would have been better to stay. But the experience wasn't that great. And so for me, and that night when I got home, I had a huge blood clot. I mean, it was like huge, so much so that I thought something else, like another baby, was coming out. It scared me. It was like at 1:30 in the morning. So that was weird. Of course, the main thing is, as long as you're not soaking a pad every hour, you're okay. And this is per the nurse, what they told me when I called the nurse line, because I was so concerned. Didn't have one again, but that night it was huge. And so I definitely didn't think that was normal. So that happened, and that was sort of the experience of the birth at the hospital, which again, to me, was just not relaxing, with that nurse not being like, just, there's hygiene that needs to be taken care of. Gloves should be worn at all times. And there were some nurses that were great. There was even one that was like, let's take a picture of you guys, because we didn't have anybody else there for us. And I wanted to record so much that in our birth plan, I said I wanted to record, and they said, it's our policy that you can't. And I said, I'd like to sign something that says I relinquished, just that I won't hold them responsible, because I thought it was important to film everything. So I didn't sign it, and we were waiting on signing that form. Nobody ever brought it. But again, things happened so fast, we obviously didn't get to record the birth. He recorded me, I think, 4 minutes before the baby came, and you know, that was hard. But I really wish it would have been there because it was just so fast. I mean, a blur. So that was really it as far as the experience there. You know, luckily he was healthy. They did his hearing test. They did all the things that they needed to do. But because he had jaundice, they wanted us to come back the next day. So pretty much since I left the hospital, I was at the doctor's office, I feel like several times a week for the first 4 weeks. I barely rested. Still felt sore in my uterus like 5 weeks in. Definitely not normal, but it was a harder birth, and so maybe that's why. But first it was jaundice, and then he pooped the first poop at the hospital, but he didn't poop for 4 days. So I was really worried, and through some friends, I took him to a chiropractor, and then he pooped the next morning. So that was good. I was really, really concerned. And then of course, throughout his little short life, he's had a rough start, which I'll have to probably do a separate thing. I've already done a video on the tongue tie and the lip tie, but that sort of started the rest of this time, and it's just felt like he's been here forever, and he's only 8 weeks. So that's just a little recap of, you know, our experience there, and so glad he's here. But man, it was a rough start, like just physically for me, and for him a little bit with his tongue tie and lip tie. So, right? I know it. A little bit rough. So, anyway, hi there. Hi, because I haven't showed you. Hello. Can you say hi?